Hello and welcome to Pluralsight's IT Ops News and Talk. I'm Don Jones and this is our inaugural show for September 2015. Throughout the presentation, if you've joined us for the live broadcast, I invite you to submit your questions of our guests, so I'll incorporate those into the show. And if you're watching this later, consider joining us live on the last Tuesday of the month. Watch at Pluralsight on Twitter for schedule announcements. So let's just start with a quick review of some of the most interesting IT Ops news bits over the past month. First up, in a somewhat unexpected development, Microsoft has split the SQL Server Management Studio product away from the core SQL Server product, meaning the management interface, the GUI, is now separate from the product that it actually manages. While the two have always been developed by separate actual teams of programmers, they've always been developed in conjunction and released in lockstep. This change means that Management Studio can now be treated as its own product and perhaps released more frequently than the actual RDBMS engine. This is a big deal in terms of how we deal with the Microsoft space because it's a further indication of the company moving to smaller, more granular release cycles. It'll be interesting to see how this plays out, what benefits it confers, and maybe what problems it creates. So, have you grabbed your Windows 10 update yet? Keep in mind that a lot of Windows 10's new features won't start lighting up for 6 months or more as Microsoft continues to push out new features via Windows Update. And get used to that being the new normal. It's not hard to see a future where this release of Windows eventually loses the 10 part of its name and simply becomes Windows with all the latest stuff up to April 2016 or whenever you happen to be looking at it. Microsoft hasn't made a big secret about moving to a more agile development and release model, and this could well be it. The big question is whether or not you and your organization are ready to manage an OS that's more or less continually evolving rather than being released in multi-year stages. And of course, the open question is still the server release, not due until sometime in 2016. Will Microsoft shift that over to a constant stream of updates, or recognize that we tend to prefer formal milestones for servers and keep us on some kind of release schedule? Frankly, Win 2016 is the place to keep your eyeballs pointed because it's where most of the excitement in the Microsoft space is going to come from. And speaking of Win 2016, don't forget that it's the release where Microsoft jumps into the containers space on-premise, a market area formerly dominated by Linux containers with Docker serving as the management layer. Containers are, believe it or not, nothing new. Microsoft's AppV technology was basically containers, and a server product called Virtuoso was playing containers years ago when nobody really cared. But the modern take on containers and our industry experience in virtualization is making containers the next big thing in infrastructure. If you're worried about keeping up, this is probably the one area you should focus on in terms of broad knowledge, business applicability, and technical capability. In fact, I'm lining up an all containers show sometime within the next month or two, and I hope you'll join me for it. Now I have just a few new courses that you might be interested in the Pluralsight library. We have a ton of content in the VMware space now available, including the first courses on our new vSphere Foundations and vSphere Data Center Virtualization tracks. Hit these URLs or use our library's search feature to start updating your skills to vSphere 6. While you've been away or under a rock or not been looking, we have been loading up the Cisco content in our library. You'll find growing coverage for Cisco tracks like security, the basic routing and switching, voice, and many more from a variety of our favorite Cisco authors. And here's your entry point into the ethical hacking field with a series of courses that roughly mirror the objectives of the EC Council's CEH credential. Our expert authors, including Troy Hunt and Dale Meredith, dig way deeper than any exam, providing you with a solid foundation for understanding the basics of ethical hacking. And our project management professional training should be complete by the time you see this, giving you an opportunity to round out your resume by learning valuable project management skills. And while the material can be dry, author Casey Ayers keeps it interesting and engaging, I promise. And if you're looking for PMI certification, this series of courses meets the training time requirements for the PMP credential. And finally this month, before we bring in our guests, a quick security update. Check your Lenovo laptops, folks. And it seems like the company, if you hadn't heard, has been using a Windows 8 and later feature called Windows Platform Binary Table to install some of their own utilities. This feature lives in the machine's firmware. So even on a totally clean OS install, it'll fire up and install executable code into the OS. Now, Microsoft has advised against this behavior, not surprisingly, stating that the intent of the feature was to support anti-theft tools, which you'd certainly want to survive a wipe and reinstall situation. Lenovo says the feature can be disabled in firmware, but the behavior has even been observed on machines running Windows 7, likely using a different BIOS-based technique. The most recent firmware from Lenovo allegedly omits this feature, and the company has provided a cleanup tool for its Lenovo Service Engine executables. And now, let's get to the main portion of our show. We'd originally scheduled Justin Harris, whose recent Pluralsight course, Fundamentals of Microsoft Messaging, is designed to help newcomers to the IT ops field understand what Microsoft messaging looks like and how it works. Sadly, Justin had a last-minute scheduling conflict, but I still wanted to talk about Exchange Server and Microsoft messaging. So I've invited Pluralsight author Jason Helmick, who's taught more than a few Exchange classes in his life, to join us. Jason, welcome to the show.
Hey, Don. Great to be with you.
So I guess the big question on everyone's mind these days, at least on mine, is how much longer can I be an Exchange administrator before there is no such thing? On one hand, we've got Exchange 2016. Well, I mean, we've got Exchange 2016 coming out, so I know you've got a minute, but it also seems like this might be the last on-prem release for Exchange. What do you think the future holds for a messaging administrator?
You know, it's actually a great question, and I'm sure anybody who's an Exchange administrator or thinking about going down that route has already started hearing, probably for the last couple of years, that that job isn't going to exist. And with the upcoming release of Exchange 2016, really, you can take a look at it, and Microsoft is really speaking volumes with that release. There's no wow features coming with 2016. In fact, if you take a look at the preview right now, and we're just right around the corner from the release of this, it looks just like Exchange 2013, which, oddly enough, looks just like Exchange Online in Office 365. Now, where are the investments in Exchange 2016 and, for that matter, updates to 2013 coming from? Well, this is all being done in the cloud first, where they get their greatest experience. When you start looking at things like high availability and database availability groups, Microsoft has more experience, and their engineers have more experience than anybody else on the face of the planet doing just that. And so they're taking all that experience that they get from the cloud, and they're making some updates to the on-premises version. Well, what does this mean for an Exchange engineer? Well, it means that it really helps to understand what's going on in the cloud, because that's where it's going to happen first. The other thing is start to realize that for a lot of businesses, and this is a discussion all into itself, for a lot of businesses, it no longer makes sense both from a cost standpoint and from just a regular production and maintenance standpoint to maintain an on-premise Exchange or messaging system anymore. And I like to say to a lot of people, you know, how many Gmail servers do you have in your network? And the answer is that you don't have any. So what's the future look like? Well, it sounds like it looks pretty bleak. However, I do want to point out that a lot of companies that are going to use Exchange Online and going to the cloud, they go into what's called a hybrid type of migration, where they still have some on-premise resources, and then they have their Exchange Online or their cloud-based resources. And a lot of companies are making this decision where they're putting accounts up into the cloud, but some accounts they're still not quite comfortable with moving up there. And it may be a political reason. It may not be a technical one, but it's still a reason that they don't want to move all their accounts up to the cloud. And for that reason, they live in this hybrid mode. Well, you're still going to need Exchange engineers for that. And this hybrid mode, I've talked to several Microsoft Premier Field engineers over the last couple of years. We expect actually this hybrid mode to probably last quite a long time. So I would say that if you're already into messaging or you want to get into messaging, it's still a good route to get into, but be aware you definitely want to be able to look at this from the implementation of a hybrid setup. You want to be able to understand federated identities and how this works with the cloud. And I do want to point out that I don't get much work anymore as an Exchange engineer, so I have alternative career options in place.
Well, let me explore that a bit, because obviously at Pluralsight we're really about helping people's careers, and you know that I've always made a distinction between your career and your current job. Your career is what you do for your life, and your job is what you do right now. Is it safe for someone who, I mean, there's certainly people out there, lots of them, that their full-time job is managing Exchange, and they're probably raising their hands right now going, yeah, my company is never going to not need me. Is that safe? Is it safe to only be able to do messaging?
Well, again, I think you bring up a great point, and I would concur that my career is IT, and that means that the job I'm doing today, I'm not married to that job. I never have been. I work with messaging all the way back to Lotus Notes, but that's one of several products, and most of the product lines I work with, while today they're Microsoft-oriented, they certainly haven't always been. My job as an IT person is to be able to address the business needs that the business has at that time to reach its mission. And so I have a lot of skills. And I think what's most important is to always keep learning additional skills. And in this case with Exchange, it also weatherproofs you in the sense that, let's say that at your particular company, the mood suddenly does change with the C-exec level, and they do want to start going down the cloud-based route. Well, saying that the company's never going to do it, well, suddenly you just had the rug pulled out. If you already have capabilities and other things that you can do, you're already ahead of the game. You know, one of the best things that I think both you and I probably agree with on is that the best part about learning Exchange is learning how to automate Exchange. Well, once you have that PowerShell skill, now you can go across to several different product lines and automate several different product lines. And it really is the best thing for you to do is to learn as much as you possibly can about all the products that your business needs to be successful.
So staying on messaging, but switching products slightly, I want to talk about Microsoft's real-time communications platform. It's been through a lot of names: Exchange UC, Office Communicator, Lync, and now Skype for Business. What do you see in the future for this thing? Should it be an education priority for IT ops professionals, or will this kind of be a specialty subject?
And here's where I'm probably going to get into a little bit of trouble. When I personally am looking at things that I need to make sure that my skill sets are up on, I have to admit, as far as Lync Online and Lync has been concerned, I've been a little bit slow on it. And the reason really is implementations. Companies that are implementing it, a lot of them already have other products that they've been using. And so while Lync started to gain some strength, that didn't gain as much as what a lot of people expected. Lync Online still misses a couple of primary pieces to it. Now they've rebranded it, right, with Skype and Skype for Business. And when you do start to look at Office 365, all of a sudden, from my perspective, Skype for Business now makes a lot more sense why you want to start to use it. There are not only a lot of lists and lists of features, but just being able to be in one application, not to have to switch to another application, know where somebody is and be able to communicate them in whatever current form they wish to be communicated with. Skype for Business helps a lot with that information. And, as I work more and more with Office 365, some of the primary aspects are Exchange Online, and you use SharePoint, you combine those together, you do e-discovery across them. Well, now we can do e-discovery. And we've been able to do this in O365 for some time, where we can do e-discovery across all the products, which includes all those conversations going on in Skype for Business. So I think that as people start to take a look at the benefits in their way that their people work, they're going to see that Skype for Business makes much more sense, even if they have some of those other third-party products in place for, like, phones.
So we're going to be talking next to a Pluralsight author who's recently been working through a lot of security courses. But from a messaging perspective, what do you think is one of the bigger overlooked security aspects of an organization's messaging systems? Like briefly, anything people should be rushing to double check right now?
Yeah, and this is one of my little pet peeves, and it's something that usually I have people say, my business will never run anything through the cloud, and my first response is Do any of your users ever use Gmail? If so, your corporate information, confidential information, has already been going through the cloud for decades. If you were to work with Exchange, and this is both on-premise and Exchange Online, starting with Exchange 2013 especially, and of course with Exchange 2016, you have much better control over who can send what documents, when they're allowed to open up those documents. If they're off-site, they may not even see that there's an attachment that they can open. You have much more security control over your corporate confidential information. And with Exchange Online and Exchange On-Premises, you now have many more compliance options than you've ever had before. So if your company has to meet a certain federal regulation, Exchange can help ensure that that occurs. And so think about it. Data that only people you want authorized to be able to see it, and being able to maintain compliancy, you can't do that with Gmail. And so when it comes to security, that right there is a big change to where your corporate confidential data is ending up.
Well, good information, and thanks for joining us. So I know you've been working on some SSCP training for Pluralsight, which will be coming out probably early next year, late this year. So feel free to hang around on the call as we introduce our next author. Up next is Pluralsight author Chris Rees. And Chris just wrapped an entire series of courses covering CompTIA's new Security Plus exam. Chris, welcome aboard.
Hey, Don. Appreciate you having me here. Thanks very much.
Absolutely. So, you know, I know a lot of folks who are joining us are probably fairly experienced, and maybe they're thinking, CompTIA, Security Plus. But it seems to me like not a day goes by without a major security breach popping up on CNN. And it seems like many of these breaches, though, go right down to a failure in implementing some of the very basic stuff like you covered in your courses. What do you think that, like, institutionally we're doing wrong? Is it a lack of understanding in the industry, or is management just not paying attention to the basics?
Well, I think it's a combination of a few things. I mean, definitely, I think there is an air of complacency, especially on larger corporations. I mean, it's impossible for executive management to really police every aspect of it. And obviously, the security teams that are tasked with those specific functions, they're up to speed and they know what's going on, and certainly they're doing their job. But security really is a top-down approach. It's an all-in mindset. So, from everybody from the executive to the security teams we mentioned, but even down to the end users, it's the weakest link that actually breaks the chain. So if users don't follow the basic, just common sense security practices, then that leaves the door wide open. You know, as I mentioned in some of the courses, it doesn't matter how many locks you have on the front door if the side window is wide open, right? So if a user lets somebody in, takes a phone call, answers a question, even though they're not really sure if they should be asking it, lets somebody into the front door if they don't have a badge, things along these lines, it makes it very easy for someone to penetrate defenses, no matter how strong they may be.
And how can you start to harden that link? I mean, it seems like a lot of what we do here is that personal. People come in through the social engineering. How do you help your users just kind of understand that this is always a potential thing and understand what the latest threat profile looks like?
Well, that's a continuing challenge. It really just depends on how bought in the company itself is to that endeavor. A lot of companies will go through and issue maybe once a year or maybe twice a year, 30-minute or 10-minute video on Harry the Hacker and here's what you should do, and now it's a checkbox and they're compliant. But that really doesn't drill home the overall importance. So there needs to be an additional layer of training, I think, at least in my mind, above just a very short once a year type of training, whether that means, pen testers come in and actually do some penetration testing and then come back and display the results maybe at an all hands meeting, let the company know, hey, we did this, this, and this, and look at how far we got and look what we could have done if we were malicious, and kind of open people's eyes. Or perhaps, from time to time open up some type of honeypot or a honey net to let people in and then actually kind of pull back the kimono, so to speak, and show those results of what actually transpired throughout that exercise. So it gives people an idea that, hey, here I thought my company was some kind of one-off that nobody really cared about, but guess what? Hackers are actually targeting my company. It doesn't matter if they're mom and pop or Fortune 500 or Fortune 50. Everybody gets hacked or at least attempted to be hacked at some point. Some are obviously much bigger targets than others.
Now, you mentioned pen testing. Ethical hacking, a very popular draw these days. I think it's driven in part by high-profile events like DEF CON and Black Hat. YouTube is filled with videos on pen testing and Kali Linux. Do you think this is a fad? Do you think it's a trend? Do you think it's something that every IT ops person should be considering?
Well, I definitely think every security personnel or somebody in a security field should be looking at. That's definitely a skill set that can help. But again, it comes down to a corporate mindset. If the corporation or the company itself is not really amenable to that, and somebody starts doing some pen testing, and all of a sudden, they get in trouble for quote unquote hacking their own network, it's definitely got to be a coordinated approach, a coordinated effort. It's not something that somebody can learn those skills and kind of go off and say, well, I'm going to show them, or I'm going to kind of teach them a lesson and show them where their defenses are down, because that could land you in some hot water as well. So it's definitely a coordinated effort.
I had a conversation recently with somebody, and Jason, I think you were even in on this conversation, and it kind of came down to something like this. We all kind of assume that someone's going to try to hack us, and so we try and build up our defenses a lot. And the person on the other side of the conversation started drawing a kind of an analogy to disaster recovery. We all certainly hope that the power to the data center doesn't go out, but we know it might eventually because it's out of our control. And so we build up our defenses. We have backup batteries, we have generators, whatever else. But what's funny is while the security and the recovery, the disaster recovery kind of follow a parallel line. We know something could happen, we hope it doesn't, but it's out of our control, so we build up defenses. Disaster recovery seems to go a step further and assume that it will happen, and you have a plan for what to do. You have this offsite recovery, you've got a free ring binder with the phone numbers for the electrical company and your company's electrical contractor. You kind of have all these things that you're going to do because eventually it's going to happen and it's going to overcome your defenses. Why don't we do the same thing with security? Should we have a plan in place for the inevitable, or is it just not inevitable?
Well, that's a really good point. I think a lot of companies, well, let me back up one. To your point, some companies do that, and that's great. They do their tabletop exercises, and they run through their kind of what-ifs and their different types of scenarios, and they have protocols to address those things, and sometimes they do it maybe bi-yearly, once a year. Some companies do similar things with security. However, a lot don't, just because of the time and effort required, or they think that what they have in place is enough. We have our IDP, or intrusion detection and prevention systems. We've got FireEye or Mandiant or LastLine or whoever the big security companies are in place. We've spent millions of dollars for these types of defenses, but not realizing that if the wrong person takes a phone call and gives out information that they shouldn't have, that person can use that information from a social engineering perspective, make another phone call, use the information it just learned to get more information, and kind of drill down. And a lot of those technical controls are great. Obviously, they can get probably 90% of the people trying to hack in through that specific attack vector, but it doesn't really address the social engineering and just the personnel issue, the insider threat. So it's really a multi-pronged approach that a lot of companies just don't understand that layered defense in depth. They think we have all of our applications and our software in place. That's really all we need. And it comes down to really an educational perspective, really.
Well, speaking of education, jump in, Jason.
Yeah, if I could just jump in, I totally agree with what Chris is saying, and I want to kind of highlight one of the points that he was bringing up, is that the security is a top-down approach. And from the question that you just asked, we have these IT admins have this certain process for disaster recovery. How come it doesn't feel that we have these on the IT security side? And we actually do, but it's part of that top-down approach. So take a typical risk management framework that a company might implement. First of all, that's not visible enough for most of the stakeholders and the business leaders. They don't grasp the need. Now, they're seeing all kinds of stuff on CNN now, which hopefully they're starting to grasp it more, but they need a clear plan of action. So a risk management framework that allows the IT and IT security to be able to, do the basic things they're supposed to be doing, identifying what potential vulnerabilities and risks are out there to the assets of the company, and there's formalized procedures for this. Then identifying your mitigation procedures, just like we would do with disaster recovery. And then we need to also have, with those mitigation procedures, a way of monitoring to make sure that those controls are effective and that they're doing what they're supposed to do. But we always still want to have an incident type of reporting system where we can make sure that if something does go wrong, just like with disaster recovery, that we have the recovery capabilities already in place. So it should be just as well managed as any other aspect. I think one of the challenges is sometimes security people that I work with and some of the IT admins that I work with, they don't like to talk to each other. And part of that needs to be broken down. Those silos need to be kind of destroyed, and the knowledge that both people bring together, that's more powerful to the company. IT admins need to know more about security. They need to understand what's going on out there. And security guys, there's just a lot of stuff to learn about risk management that IT admins have been doing for a long time. So I think getting the company from a top-down approach and getting everybody to talk to each other and start to work together in a unified risk management platform is really beneficial.
So before we move on, Jason, as I mentioned, you're right in the middle of the SSCP, which is kind of entry-level practices. Chris, you've just finished up a long series on the Security Plus, and now you're working on CompTIA's Advanced Security Practitioner Training. So you both kind of have your heads around some of the things that a lot of us would consider to be the basics or the fundamentals. And if you had to pick, and I'll pose this question to each of you, if you had to pick just one or two key fundamental security things that anyone in IT ops should go revisit today, things that they probably learned a long time ago, but it's a good time to refresh, what would your suggestions be? And Chris, I'll kick it to you first.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, that could go so many different directions. I mean, the basics, just to get down to a basic level, and I think just from an ease of exploitation perspective, it would be an eye on physical security, because social engineering is kind of the low-hanging fruit, and you don't necessarily have to be a very skilled hacker, technically speaking, to kind of go through that process. So I think from a people's perspective, people that aren't necessarily IT savvy or IT and security administrators, just understanding the phone calls, don't give out information, even if it sounds like it's coming or being asked from someone that's higher up within the company, making sure that everything is kind of vetted first, make sure the number is understood. Hey, I'll give you a call back, give me a number I can reach you, that type of thing. Not letting people walk through, kind of tailgate through some of the physical securities, because again, even if you have an air-gapped system, and this was evident even with Stuxnet and the Natanz nuclear facility out in Iran, that was an air-gapped facility, but they walked through and they were able to drop USB keys and other things that were picked up and inadvertently plugged into systems, and then from there it just kind of went out and spidered through the network and was able to map everything and send the information back. So it's a lot of times it's the simple things, the simple breaches that really net the most return. So a lot of times it's not really the millions of dollars that you're spending on the perimeters. It's somebody can walk right through the front door and affect some type of breach.
Yeah, that's a really good point. In fact, we've had a number of really high-profile breaches. The Sony Picture Studios breach, and a lot that were built from a physical intrusion first, not an electronic one. I always used to tell folks when I worked in a big office, they'd come down and say, well, we need you to make sure that all the file permissions are right on the file server. I said, look at all these printouts laying around. I'm not securing anything until people lock those things up or shred them. So I totally get it. Jason, what would you say?
And I would agree with both you and Chris on this. And I would just, as I have this conversation with a lot of IT admins and trying to remind them of the importance of security, I have a tendency to throw out the phrase that the worst security is the security not implemented. And what that really means is for IT admins, you already know a lot about what you need to be doing to secure your environment. Great example is, and I use this as kind of a stump question, so let me kind of try it on you, Don. In your network, if you are aware of any shares on a Windows server where users have, well, more permissions than they're supposed to have, well, you're now kind of part of the security problem. In other words, if you're aware of this and haven't fixed it, then that's where the security challenges start to come in. It's this lackadaisical approach. So really what I would hope to encourage people to do is, yes, I think IT admins should learn more about security. I think it really matters, and we're seeing it constantly, how businesses are being affected. I can't tell you how many times my credit card has had to be changed out recently. But at the same time, we already know a lot of basics that we're not actually fulfilling that we need to go back to and make sure that we're doing. We've got to make sure that we've applied the permissions correctly. And I know it's a tough job, and that's one of the reasons you want to get into automation to make your life easier on this. But go back to the basics that we already know and make sure that we've done the groundwork that we need to do to help secure the system. And then definitely, like Chris mentioned, social engineering and it is definitely, part of that low-hanging fruit. But go back to those basics and take care of the stuff that you already know how to take care of and make sure it's locked up.
Cool. Excellent information. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us, and I will be looking forward to your next Pluralsight courses. And
Thanks,
now,
Don.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. And now I get to have my say. This month's subject, change control. And I am going to be honest with you and just say that I don't like most IT management frameworks very much, especially their treatment of change control. Now, don't get me wrong. I completely understand the desire to maintain stability by carefully managing what happens in the environment. Let me say it again. I understand the desire to manage change. If you've got 100 people making changes to the blueprints for a building, that blueprint ain't going to get built right. I get it. I do. But too many of these frameworks place too heavy a focus on stopping change. And they do it in a disingenuous fashion. Oh, we're all about change for the right reasons. We just have to take it slow so nothing breaks. This is like the Department of Motor Vehicles. Oh, we totally want to get you your license in a timely fashion. With a smile on our faces, it just doesn't always work out. But it's for your own good. Creating something called a change management framework in such a way that it's little more than a change barrier system isn't embracing change. It's calling change a smelly bum and asking him to leave the building. I think what we have to recognize is where this desire comes from, a soul-crushing fear of failure. We all know that change is what breaks things, and we are terrified of breaking things. And so we try to control that change to within an inch of its life. We slow it down. We talk about it. We subject it to public inquiry and make it stand naked in front of the rest of the class. But little children break things too. And if you chain them to a wall to mitigate that breakage, someone from the government is going to get very upset with you. Even if you think your toilet is mission critical and must not have stuffed animals stuffed into it, you can't have a meeting every time your child needs to take a poo. And so I want to offer the somewhat radical observation that we never prevent failure entirely. And while we may massively reduce failure, we actually tend to spend more time preventing failure than actually accomplishing things. Given that we spend so much time managing change relative to the amount of change we actually make, it is not unreasonable from an outsider's view to conclude that we just don't really want change in the first place. In this respect, change management is almost literally a Dilbert cartoon where we talk about having a meeting to plan for the meeting where we'll discuss meetings about not making changes. And the result of change management is slow change. That's the actual slogan of change management, slow change. But slow managed change no longer meets the actual business needs of many organizations, if not all of them. As vendors like Microsoft pump out changes on a monthly basis, remember what I was saying about Windows 10 earlier, we need faster change. As our own internal developers move to more agile project management and produce code faster, we need the ability to deploy it more quickly. Slow change simply isn't meeting the actual need. Yes, we still need to provide stability to our environments. Absolutely, a change management framework of some kind could provide the means for doing that while still accommodating faster change. And in reality, I'm not really beating up on change management frameworks. I swear I'm not. Most of my suggested solution, in fact, will prove to be a change management framework. What I'm beating up on is the culture, the attitudes that we've developed in IT, and that's what we need to change. We need to start by coming up with a realistic organizational definition of mission critical. Simply standing around and saying that everything has to be perfect every time isn't just unrealistic, it's stupid. Your car gets a flat tire and nobody dies, so learn to live with a little failure in your life. Even professional sports teams lose a game from time to time, and most of those players make way more money than you or I, and they get over it. The email server does not need to be running 100% of the time. Yes, it is inconvenient when it doesn't run, and a lot of people notice, but provided it's a short outage, you won't actually lose any money, and it's unlikely anyone will actually die. And for that matter, why are you still running your own email server? If we're going to accommodate a faster rate of change while still staying safe and reliable, we need to think about what really matters in life. Let your IT team become expert in dealing with things only they can deal with. And remove the distractions that can be handled far better by someone else. Do you know what Office 365's uptime has been since its launch? Probably better than yours. So whatever it is your team is running around firefighting these days, look into getting rid of it unless it's completely custom, completely core to your business, and completely impossible to get rid of. Not impractical, impossible. What we need is to cultivate a culture of failure. And that means failure without fear. This is really what the whole DevOps movement is all about, and it's actually pretty achievable. In fact, the DevOps philosophy largely came from the inability of IT ops to match the growing agility of software development. The developers beat us, guys and gals, and we've got to catch up. So how can you learn to stop worrying and love the fail? Well, by spending less time trying to stop change and more time becoming really good at recovering from failure. If you're confident that you can put things right, no matter what, really fast, then failure stops to matter so much. You want to change some stuff? Fine, go ahead. If it explodes, I'll just click undo, which probably makes you chuckle and wish that IT ops had an undo button. Well, maybe yours doesn't, but it should, and it could. This starts in large part with automation. Automation means change with consistency and change at a rate faster than you can perform manually. That means actions like recovery can be automated, from snapshotting a VM to quickly restoring that snapshot to a million other tasks. Embrace an IT culture of automation. There should be a goal of 0 ad hoc activities. Your environment should be configured and managed 100% declaratively, using technologies like Microsoft's desired state configuration or platforms like Puppet, Chef, Salt, Ansible, and others. Declarative configuration actually prevents change that hasn't gone through a vetting process, so you change management advocates should love it. But it also makes change easier and more policy-driven, which means it can happen faster and be undone just as quickly. When your environment's configuration is basically a text document, there actually is an undo button that can put things right if needed. And fail with style and pride. Know that failure is literally the only kind of learning our monkey brains actually works well with. You know why kids learn so fast? No fear of failure. Embrace failure culturally as the learning opportunity it is, knowing that the world is not lost and that you can recover. Perhaps spending less time worrying about change and more time worrying about the learning opportunity of a postmortem. And yes, I know that some systems actually are mission critical. I'm thinking of systems that support human life or major financial markets, by the way, not your email server or your customer management system. For those, learn to focus your change control efforts to minimize change only on those systems that are absolutely crucial to the continued rotation of our planet around the sun. Get a thick skin for everything else and admit to yourself that being able to log on to Facebook 24/7 isn't actually all that important. Change management frameworks of the future need to be the ones that encourage and accommodate change with a deep focus on changing again very quickly when things go wrong. When something breaks, you don't panic or overreact by abolishing change. You simply change it again to fix it. Trust me. I know most of you are out there shaking your heads because your organization will never go for this. I get it. But those organizations are not the ones who will survive in the coming economy. And you might start to think about real hard about what that means to your job security. Our industry is moving faster, faster, faster. And if you are going to survive in it, it'll be by learning to keep up, not by tying yourself to the back bumper of the truck and trying to slow it down. Change is not only inevitable, it is desirable. And dynamic companies that survive will make their money by changing, not by slowing change down. Of course, that's just my perspective. I hope you'll share yours, and here's where you can reach us on Twitter. Thanks very much for joining us, and I'll see you next month with another episode of IT Ops News and Talk. For Pluralsight, I'm Don Jones.